I retired at 65 and bought the oldest bookstore in a small town in Maine because I wanted to spend the rest of my life surrounded by quiet people and dusty shelves instead of conference rooms and quarterly reports. 3 weeks after I opened the shop, my daughter-in-law stood behind my counter, smiled at my customers, and announced, "You won't be running this place much longer. Daniel and I already decided we're turning it into a wine bar." She said it as if the building already belonged to her. The strange part wasn't that she believed it. The strange part was that my son looked at the floor and said nothing. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. The keys to Hollow Oak books felt heavier than they should have, not because they were old, because they represented 42 years of saying, maybe next year. Next year I'd travel. Next year I'd slow down. Next year I'd read the novels stacked beside my bed. Next year I'd stop answering emails at midnight. Next year never came. Until retirement. I sold my consulting firm outside Boston, paid cash for the bookstore, a 2-story brick building on Main Street in Camden. The previous owner, Walter Briggs, had run it for nearly 50 years. When he handed me the keys, his eyes watered. "Take care of her." I smiled. "I will." He wasn't talking about the building. He meant the bookstore itself. The first month was exactly what I'd hoped for. Every morning I unlocked the front door at 8, turned the sign to open, ground fresh coffee, fed Oliver. Oliver wasn't my cat. He simply lived in the bookstore and had apparently decided years ago that every owner belonged to him. Customers wandered slowly through the aisles. Some bought books. Some only wanted conversation. A retired teacher came every Tuesday. A young mother read picture books with her daughter every Thursday afternoon. An old fisherman spent Saturdays drinking coffee while pretending to browse history books. Nobody hurried. Nobody shouted. Nobody checked stock prices. For the first time since my 20s, I enjoyed Mondays. My son Daniel visited every other weekend. He was 38, worked in commercial real estate in Boston. Good kid. Always had been. Life simply became complicated after he married Ashley. Ashley wasn't loud. She was polished, always smiling, always complimenting people, always making every conversation feel like a business meeting. She never asked questions because she cared. She asked questions because information had value. The first time she visited the bookstore, she walked around silently for nearly 20 minutes. She wasn't looking at books. She was calculating square footage, traffic, parking, visibility from the street. I knew that look. I'd negotiated with enough investors to recognize it instantly. Finally, she smiled. "This location is incredible. Thank you. You know what this place really needs?" I laughed. "More books?" She didn't. "It needs to make money." I pretended not to notice. People say strange things. Not every opinion deserves an argument. Over the next several weeks, she kept returning. Sometimes with Daniel, sometimes alone. Each visit included another suggestion. "You should replace half the shelves. People don't buy books anymore. You could serve cocktails. Live music would double weekend traffic. There's no money in nostalgia." I smiled politely. "This isn't an investment project." She tilted her head. "Everything is." Daniel rarely spoke. When he did, it was always the same. "She's just trying to help." Maybe, maybe not. One rainy Thursday afternoon, I was organizing first editions when Ashley walked into the office without knocking. She closed the door behind her. "I've been thinking." That sentence immediately put me on guard. She placed a folder on my desk. Inside were architectural renderings. Beautiful ones. The bookstore was gone. In its place stood a modern wine bar with exposed brick, pendant lighting, outdoor seating, and a rooftop deck. Even the name had changed. Oak and Vine. She watched my face carefully. "What do you think?" I closed the folder. "I think you're in the wrong building." She laughed as though I'd made a joke. "No, seriously." "I am serious." She leaned forward. "Richard, this property is worth so much more than books. It's worth exactly what I bought it for." "No," she smiled. "It's worth what someone is willing to pay." That conversation stayed with me longer than I expected. Not because of the wine bar, because she had already paid an architect, without asking me. 2 days later, Daniel called. "Dad, Ashley probably came on a little strong." "A little?" She gets excited. I looked around the bookstore. Sunlight filtered through the front windows. Oliver slept on the history shelf. A customer quietly turned the pages of an old Hemingway novel. I didn't retire to maximize quarterly revenue. I know. I retired to slow down. I know. There was a long silence. Then Daniel said something that didn't make sense. "Just don't make any big decisions until we talk next weekend." "What decisions?" Another pause. "You'll understand." Then he hung up. That sentence bothered me all week. You'll understand. Understand what? Saturday morning arrived with unusually heavy traffic. By 10 o'clock, nearly every parking space outside the bookstore was occupied. At first, I thought there was a town festival. Then I noticed people carrying clipboards, measuring tapes, professional cameras. One man walked directly onto my sidewalk and began photographing the building. I stepped outside. "Can I help you?" He smiled politely. "We're here for the commercial evaluation." My stomach tightened. "What commercial evaluation?" He checked his clipboard. "Future redevelopment assessment." I stared at him. There must be some mistake. He looked confused. "We were hired by Harbor Street Development." "I've never heard of them." He frowned. "You're Richard Bennett?" "Yes." His expression changed immediately. "I'm sorry." He lowered the clipboard. "I thought the sale had already gone through." My heartbeat slowed, then immediately doubled. "What sale?" The man looked genuinely uncomfortable. "I think you should call your attorney." He walked back toward his truck, leaving me standing on the sidewalk, holding the bookstore keys, while wondering why strangers believed someone had already sold my building. I didn't call my attorney. Not right away. Instead, I watched the survey crew work from inside the bookstore. They measured the sidewalk, photographed the roof, marked notes on printed maps. Every few minutes, one of them glanced toward my front windows, like they expected someone else to come outside. Not me. Someone already expecting them. That bothered me more than anything. At noon, I locked the front door for lunch. Normally, I walked to the diner across the street. That day, I stayed in my office. I pulled my purchase documents from the filing cabinet. Warranty deed, title insurance, closing statement, property survey. Everything looked exactly as it had the day I bought the building. No liens, no easements, no pending sales, no agreements, nothing. Yet strangers believed my bookstore had already been sold. People don't drive 3 hours with survey equipment because of a rumor. Somebody had hired them. Somebody had paid them. I finally called my attorney. Margaret Ellis had handled dozens of commercial transactions for me over the years. She answered on the second ring. "Richard, and I have a strange question. I've known you 30 years. They're usually strange." I explained everything. The surveyors, the redevelopment company, the photographs, the mention of a completed sale. She interrupted only once. Did you sign anything recently? No. Power of attorney? No. Development proposal? No. She became quiet. Give me the company's name. Harbor Street Development. I'll call you back. She called 43 minutes later. Her voice sounded different. Professional. Careful. Richard. What? They're real. I assumed that. They've submitted preliminary redevelopment plans to the town. I stared through the office window. Oliver stretched across an old leather chair. Customers continued browsing as though nothing unusual was happening. How? I don't know yet. Another pause. But I found something interesting. What? The contact person representing the future ownership isn't Harbor Street. My grip tightened around the phone. It's someone named Ashley Monroe. For a second, I thought I'd misheard. My daughter-in-law? That's the name listed. I thanked her and ended the call. Not because I wanted the conversation to end, because I needed silence. Ashley hadn't asked permission. She hadn't even asked whether I'd ever consider selling. She'd simply started acting like she already owned the building. Daniel arrived the following Saturday, alone. He looked exhausted. His suit jacket hung loosely over his shoulders. He'd lost weight. We sat upstairs in the reading room where customers rarely came. Neither of us spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, I asked, "Did you know surveyors were coming?" His eyes dropped. Yes. My stomach sank. How long? A few weeks. And you never thought to tell me? I kept hoping Ashley would let it go. I laughed. Not because anything was funny, because disappointment sometimes sounds exactly like laughter. Tell me everything. Daniel rubbed his forehead. It started with an investor. What investor? A client from work. He loved the location. He asked Ashley what your plans were. And? She said eventually you'd want to sell. I never said that. I know. He looked ashamed. So why tell him? Because... He stopped. Started again. She thought she'd convince you. Convince me? That it was smarter than keeping a bookstore. That wasn't the worst part. The worst part came next. Daniel pulled an envelope from his briefcase. I shouldn't have this. He handed it to me. Inside were copies of emails. Not one, not two, more than 30. All between Ashley and Harbor Street Development. The oldest was dated almost 4 months earlier, weeks before she'd ever suggested the wine bar. I began reading. One sentence froze me. The current owner is emotionally attached, but my husband will convince him. Another. Once Richard agrees, we'll move quickly before anyone else approaches him. Another. The bookstore itself has no future. The land is what matters. I closed the folder, very carefully. 42 years in business had taught me something important. The angrier I became, the slower I moved. When did you find these? 3 days ago. How? I wasn't looking. He looked embarrassed. She left her laptop open. I nodded. And? I sent copies to myself. Does she know? No. I leaned back. For the first time since retiring, I felt like I was back in a boardroom. Except this negotiation wasn't about money. It was about trust. Why are you telling me now? Daniel didn't answer immediately. Finally, he whispered, because she crossed a line. What line? He looked straight at me. I found out she wasn't planning to ask you. I frowned. What do you mean? He swallowed hard. Such she was planning to pressure you until you believed selling was your own idea. Neither of us spoke. The old grandfather clock downstairs chimed 3. Customers laughed softly somewhere below us. Life continued. Yet everything had changed. Before leaving, Daniel stopped at the office door. "Dad." "Yes? If Ashley calls, she will. Don't tell her you know." I studied his face. "Why?" His answer made my blood run cold. "Because she thinks the bookstore is only the beginning." "What does that mean?" He looked toward the stairs to make sure nobody could hear. Then he said quietly, "She's been telling investors that once this deal closes, your lake cabin in New Hampshire will be next." I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was worried about the bookstore. Buildings can be repaired. Businesses can recover. Trust is different. Once it breaks, it never fits together the same way again. I sat in the apartment above the bookstore with a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands. Downstairs, Oliver scratched at the office door, reminding me it was almost breakfast. Life has a strange habit of continuing, even when yours suddenly feels unfamiliar. The next morning, I opened the store at 8, exactly as always. Mrs. Collins came in for her mystery novel. Tom, the retired fisherman, complained about the weather. A little boy spent 20 minutes deciding between two dinosaur books. I smiled. Recommended titles, wrapped purchases. If someone had walked in, they never would have guessed my family was quietly planning the future of a building they didn't own. At 11, my phone buzzed. "Ashley." I let it ring. A minute later, another call, then another. Finally, she texted, "We need to talk today." I replied with 2 words. "Come by." She arrived 30 minutes later. Perfect hair, cream-colored blazer, designer handbag, the same confident smile she wore at every family gathering. She looked around the bookstore before speaking. "I love how busy it is. You didn't come here to compliment me." She laughed softly. "No." She walked directly into my office and closed the door behind her. "I've been thinking." "I know. I believe we're finally ready to move forward." "Forward with what?" She looked genuinely surprised. "The property?" I stayed quiet. Silence makes dishonest people uncomfortable. Sure enough, she filled it. "The developer is prepared to make an excellent offer." I didn't ask for one. "You don't have to. They're already interested." "I know," she smiled. "So Daniel told you?" "No." Her smile faded. "Then how do you know?" "I've learned enough." For the first time since I'd known her, Ashley looked uncertain. Only for a second. Then the confidence returned. "Richard." She leaned forward. "You've had your dream." "My dream? You wanted to own a bookstore." "I do. And you have." She spread her hands. "But dreams change." I looked at the shelves surrounding us. Thousands of books. Old oak floors. Sunlight falling through stained glass windows. Children laughing downstairs. "No," I said quietly. "They don't." Her voice became firmer. "You're thinking emotionally." "Yes. Business doesn't work that way. I'm retired." "Exactly. You don't need this place." I smiled. "I don't need the money either." That answer clearly wasn't part of her plan. She crossed one leg over the other. "What if I told you the offer was over $3 million? I shrugged. I'd still say no. $4 million? No. She stared at me, almost studying me, trying to find the number. Everyone has one, she probably thought. Everyone eventually says yes. "You know," she said finally, "Daniel agrees with me." That was a lie. I could hear it before she finished the sentence. Still, it hurt. Not because I believed her, because she thought I would. She stood, straightened her jacket. "You should think carefully." "I already have. I'd hate for this to become unpleasant." There it was. Not a threat. Not exactly. Just enough to make sure I understood. She left. 5 minutes later, my phone rang. Daniel. I'm sorry. For what? I just got home. What happened? She told me she was coming here. You didn't know? No. I believed him. His voice sounded defeated. Not rehearsed. Not manipulated. Just tired. That evening, my attorney called again. I found something. What? The redevelopment application. What about it? It includes preliminary ownership authorization. I never signed anything. I know. She paused. Richard, the signature isn't yours. My heart skipped. What? It's similar. But it isn't yours. I stood so quickly my chair rolled into the bookshelf. You're saying someone forged it? I'm saying I want a forensic document examiner to look at it before we accuse anyone. I drove to her office the next morning. She laid 2 documents on the conference table. One was my actual signature from the bookstore purchase. The other looked almost identical. Same initials, same curve, same pressure, but not quite. After 40 years of signing contracts, I recognized my own handwriting instantly. It wasn't mine. Someone had practiced it. Very well, but not perfectly. Margaret looked at me carefully. I have another question. What? Who had access to documents containing your signature? I didn't answer, because I already knew. Ashley had spent hours in my office over the last month. She'd admired framed certificates, business awards, old contracts hanging on the wall. At the time, I thought she was being polite. Now I wondered if she'd simply been collecting samples. As I left the law office, my phone vibrated. It was Daniel. His voice was shaking. Dad, what happened? I confronted Ashley. And? There was a long silence. Then he whispered something I never expected to hear. She admitted she never wanted the bookstore. I frowned. What? She said. His breathing became uneven. She said the bookstore was only proof that you'd eventually give in. What are you talking about? Another silence. Then came the sentence that changed everything. She already promised investors they'd get all 3 of your properties, because she believed I'd inherit them sooner than anyone expected. I sat in my car for nearly 20 minutes after Daniel's call. The bookstore stood across the street, exactly as it had the day I bought it. The same brick walls, the same green awning, the same wooden sign Walter Briggs had painted by hand nearly 40 years earlier. Funny how a place can look completely unchanged, while everything inside your life falls apart. Daniel arrived just before sunset. He looked worse than I'd ever seen him. Not angry, not emotional, just empty. We locked the bookstore early and sat in the reading room upstairs. Neither of us touched the coffee I'd made. Finally, he spoke. I asked her if it was true. I waited. She didn't deny it. He rubbed both hands over his face. She said I was overreacting. What exactly did she admit? He laughed once, a tired laugh. The bookstore, the lake cabin, the condo in Boston. She said they were wasted on one retired man. I didn't interrupt. People tell the truth more easily when nobody rushes them. Then I asked why she'd been meeting with developers. He looked at the floor. She said she was planning our future. Our future. She said once everything was sold, we'd never have to work again. The room became painfully quiet. I had spent 42 years building a business, 30 years paying off properties, countless weekends working while other people were on vacation. To Ashley, they weren't memories. They were assets. I asked her one last question. Daniel looked up. I asked if she ever planned to tell you. What did she say? His eyes filled for the first time. She said, Richard would eventually realize he's too old to manage everything. I closed my eyes. Not because I was hurt, because I suddenly understood every conversation we'd had during the past year, every compliment, every suggestion, every visit. She hadn't been getting to know me. She'd been studying me. The following Monday, Margaret called. The handwriting expert finished. And? The signature isn't yours. I let out a slow breath. We can prove it. Without any doubt. She paused. Richard, I've already filed notice with the town. The redevelopment application has been withdrawn. That should have been the end. It wasn't. Wednesday afternoon, Ashley walked into the bookstore. For the first time, she didn't look confident. She looked desperate. Customers quietly browsed nearby. Oliver slept on the front counter. She asked, "Can we talk?" I nodded toward the office. "No," she frowned. "I don't understand. You wanted this to become business. So we'll keep it business. If you have something to say, you can say it here." She glanced around the store. People were pretending not to listen, but everyone was. She lowered her voice. "I made mistakes." "Yes." "I got carried away." "Yes." "I was trying to build something for Daniel." "No." That single word stopped her. "You were building something for yourself." She looked genuinely offended. "That's not fair." I smiled sadly. "It became fair the moment you practiced my signature." The color disappeared from her face. You don't need to explain. I already know." She looked toward the front windows, like she was searching for an escape. There wasn't one. "I never wanted to hurt you." "No. You just wanted everything I'd spent my life building." She left without another word. It was the last time I ever saw her. Daniel filed for divorce 6 weeks later. He didn't ask me what to do. He simply called one evening. "Dad, I'm sorry." "For what?" "For not seeing it sooner." I thought about that for a moment. Then I said, "People who manipulate rarely start with big lies. They start with small ones. They train everyone around them to ignore uncomfortable feelings. You finally stopped ignoring yours." The divorce took nearly 8 months. There were arguments over money, furniture, accounts, lawyers, but not the bookstore, not the cabin, not the condo. Every forged document had been withdrawn before it could do any damage. Margaret made sure of that. The following spring, something unexpected happened. Walter Briggs, the man who had sold me the bookstore, walked through the front door carrying a small wooden box. I heard what happened. I smiled. So did everyone else. He laughed. "Small towns." He placed the box on the counter. "I've been saving this." Inside lay the original brass key to the bookstore, the one from 1948. "I forgot to give it to you." I held it in my hand. Cold, heavy, beautiful. Walter smiled. I wanted the right person to have it. Daniel moved back to Maine that summer. Not into my apartment. Not because he had nowhere to go. Because he wanted to start over. He found work with a local commercial firm. Ironically, helping preserve historic buildings instead of replacing them. On Saturdays, he worked beside me in the bookstore, shelving books, making coffee, talking with customers. Sometimes we spent more time discussing novels than business. Neither of us minded. One rainy afternoon, a little girl walked up to the counter holding a worn copy of Charlotte's Web. She couldn't have been older than 8. "Do you think this book is worth buying?" I smiled. "It's worth reading." Her mother laughed. "We'll take it." After they left, Daniel looked around the store. "I finally understand. Understand what? Why you never wanted to sell. I looked at the shelves, at Oliver sleeping in his favorite chair, at the sunlight touching thousands of old pages. Then I answered, some places make money. I rested my hand on the old brass key, and some places remind people who they are. Outside, customers kept walking past the windows. Inside, someone rang the bell above the front door. Another reader had arrived. And for the first time since retiring, I realized I'd never really bought a bookstore. I'd bought the quiet life I'd been working toward all along. 6 months after Daniel moved back to Maine, I found an envelope tucked beneath the bookstore door before opening one Monday morning. There was no stamp, no return address, just my name written neatly across the front. For a moment, I thought it might be another advertisement, or another developer hoping to buy the building. Instead, I found a handwritten letter. It was from Ashley. I almost threw it away. Instead, I made a cup of coffee, sat in Walter's old chair, and unfolded the paper. The first line surprised me. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I kept reading. For months, I kept trying to convince myself I was helping Daniel build a better future. The truth is, I stopped seeing people and started seeing opportunities. Somewhere along the way, I forgot the difference. There was no dramatic apology, no request to come back, no attempt to blame Daniel. For the first time, the letter sounded honest. She admitted she'd spent years believing success meant acquiring more property, more investments, more control. She wrote that losing her marriage had forced her to ask herself a question she'd avoided for years. If everything I wanted cost me the people I loved, was it ever worth wanting? I folded the letter carefully. Then I walked downstairs. Oliver was waiting beside the front door, impatient for breakfast. Some things never changed. I fed him before unlocking the store. That afternoon, Daniel stopped by after work. He found the letter lying beside the register. You read it? I did. What did you think? I considered the question. I think people can regret what they did. He nodded. But regret doesn't erase consequences. No, it doesn't. He picked up the envelope. Are you going to answer her? I looked around the bookstore. A young couple sat near the fireplace reading travel books. Mrs. Collins was searching the mystery section. Someone laughed near the children's shelves. Finally, I smiled. I already have. What do you mean? I kept living. Daniel smiled for a long moment. Then he placed the letter back on the counter. I think that's enough. So do I. That autumn, the town held its annual harvest festival. For the first time in years, Main Street was closed to traffic. Families wandered between food stands. Children painted pumpkins. Musicians played outside the bakery. Walter insisted the bookstore stay open late. By evening, every chair was occupied. People weren't buying expensive books. Most bought paperbacks for $5. Some bought nothing at all. They simply stayed, talking, reading, laughing, exactly the kind of place Walter had hoped it would remain. As the festival ended, Walter stood beside me outside the front door. You know, he said quietly, I almost sold this building to a developer before you came along. I looked at him. What changed your mind? He smiled toward the bookstore windows glowing in the evening light. I realized buildings aren't remembered for what they're worth. They're remembered for what they give people. That sentence stayed with me. Months later, I had a small bronze plaque made. Nothing elaborate, just 4 simple words. I placed it beside the entrance where customers could see it before walking inside. It read, Everyone is welcome here. Sometimes people stopped to read it. Most walked in without saying anything. But every now and then, someone would smile. And that was enough. Because I'd finally learned something retirement had taken 40 years to teach me. The greatest investment I ever made wasn't the consulting company, or the condo, or the lake cabin. It wasn't even the bookstore. It was refusing to let someone else's greed decide the value of the life I'd already built. Every evening, before locking the front door, I still ran my hand across the old brass key Walter had given me. Not because I worried someone might take the bookstore, but because it reminded me that some things become priceless the moment you stop measuring them in dollars. I turned off the lights. The bell above the door rang softly as I stepped outside. Across Main Street, the last golden light of the day settled over the old brick buildings. For a long moment, I simply stood there listening to the quiet. It sounded exactly like the retirement I'd spent 42 years earning.